Good afternoon, everyone. Allison Schaberg here with Consolidated Planning Group. If you're joining us for the first time for one of our webinars, we're glad you're here. We put webinars out on usually a weekly basis on topics typically surrounding special needs. We do have a YouTube channel where we kind of archive some of these recordings of the past if you've missed some of them. Consolidated Planning Group is a holistic special needs financial planning firm. I come to you as a mother I have 4 kids, and I have 2 that have special needs, one that has transitioned into adulthood already, and one that is on the brink of transitioning. And so anyway, we just put these out there because it seems like the world of special needs is sometimes difficult at best as when it comes to navigating. And we want to put this information in your hands to help your journey make it a little bit lighter. So today we don't see you and we can't hear you. Your microphones and your cameras are muted, but we know you're there and we're glad you're here. Today's event is being recorded, and you will get an email either today or tomorrow with this recording and information how to contact us, Consolidated Planning Group, as well as how to contact Jennifer Swanson at the Shields Law Firm. So we are excited today. So today's topic is making the most of your IEP team and ARD meeting. And we're super excited to have Jennifer Swanson here again with us from the Shields Law Firm. And she's going to be talking about 3 essential tips every special needs parent needs to know. And just how many teachers or educators do we have in our group today? If you'll just put, if you're a teacher or an educator in the chat box today, I'd love to know that. And having said that, Jennifer, welcome. Thanks for being with us today and partnering with us today. I'm going to turn everything over to you.
Thanks so much, Allison. I'm really excited to be here. So let's talk about making the most of your IEP team or ARD meeting. If you live in Texas, you call it an ARD meeting. If you're in the other 49 states, you call it an IEP team meeting. But let's talk about those tips before we get, obviously here's our contact information. But let's just cover our disclaimer. We love what we do. We are attorneys. Today is not intended to be legal advice. This is general information. But like Allison said, we're happy to answer as many questions at the end as we can. Okay, so let's talk about the first tip. So you want to make the most of your IEP meeting. Now, I am a former teacher in addition to being an attorney, and I love the ARD process. I think the ARD process is one of the most important parts of collaborating with your school, especially when your child has an IEP. But there are some things that you can do to make it better for yourself. Okay, and so the first tip we want to talk about is gathering all of the relevant data. Okay, so the first thing that we would encourage you to do as a regular practice is to request your child's full educational record. We suggest that you do this at least annually, and let's talk about why you should do that. The first reason is so that you'll know what their file contains, what's in their file, what assessments are being given, what data is being collected. When we talk about an educational file, okay, there are a bunch of different components. You have their eligibility folder that you would find. It's going to have their special education information. It might be in the DIAG's office, but it's going to be on their campus. Then you have what we call a cumulative folder, sometimes called a cum folder. And this is going to have more general education information, enrollment documents. Records of their reading assessments, math assessments, all of the typical data that the school tracks, and then of course shot records, things like that. And then there are other types of records that can be kept in different places throughout your school district, okay? Your child's educational record is anything with personally identifiable information about you or your child, or anything that describes them. So you want to at least annually get a copy of that, so that you can know what's in the file. It's really important because it can help you catch mistakes. If some other child's information is there, or you find a record that doesn't accurately reflect what the truth about your child, And most importantly, as the ARD process is concerned, is that it allows you to be fully informed. When you come to the ARD table, you will have the same documentation available to you that the ARD committee has, because as you know, you're an ARD committee member, you have the right to know what the ARD committee knows. Okay, so put it on your calendar. Every year, you're going to annually request your child's full educational record. Okay. So let's talk about requesting records as a process. So under FERPA, you can request your record, and the school has to provide that educational record no more than 45 days after the receipt of a request. Okay. Now you might be saying, Jennifer, 45 days. I hear you. So here's a little bit of a tip. If you request that record prior to an ARD meeting, then they have to give you the record prior to the ARD meeting. So if you know that your annual ARD, for example, is always in October, make that request mid-September, late September, give them some notice, let them know you want it, and they have to provide it to you right before the ARD meeting so you can review it. So you don't have to wait the 45 days. Okay, so that's a little bit of a tip. Okay. Some other information. Now, all of this in theory should be in your child's educational record, but some of this is a little more nuanced. So let's talk about other types of records, data, information you want to gather prior to an ARD meeting. Okay, let's talk about IEP progress reports and IEP data collection. So in your child's IEP, they have goals, right? You want to look, if you look under there, it will tell you how those goals are measured and when the periodic reports on the progress will be given to you. Typically, it's commensurate with report cards. So every 9 weeks or 6 weeks, depending on how your district's grading period goes. It doesn't have to be commensurate with report cards, but that's typically how we see it. So you should be getting regular IEP progress reports at least every grading period. But that only tells you how the district is coding their progress. So an example would be they're at 60% on goal number 1. Well, that's great. 60% is good progress, but there's even more information you can gather. You can get the IEP data collection. So the daily, weekly collection of data that the teacher is taking as they're working on that goal. And that's really important because you want to make sure that the data collection matches up with the progress reporting. You can do that through requesting the full educational record. It should be in there, but there's a good chance that the teacher will have it and you won't get it. So you want to make sure you talk to the teacher and request it when you're getting your progress reports. Okay, other types of records you want to consider getting. So work samples, tests. Tests can be a broad range of data. Okay, it can be benchmarks. So benchmarks are typically district created tests that mirror a lot of times standardized testing, most commonly the STAR, that are given once or twice a semester depending on your district. Common-based assessments, which are going to be more classroom-based. Screeners, which are some of them are required by law, like the dyslexia screener. Some of them are given per grade level, specific guidelines based on the school you're in, and they could be anything from a math fact screener or a reading screener, a running record, things like that. And then of course BOI, MOI, and EOI. That's beginning, end, and middle of year. So most districts, depending on your grade level, will take a specific type of data at these 3 junctures to measure progress in students. So you want to talk to the teacher also and say, okay, my child is in X grade level. What types of assessments do you give to track progress for students in this grade level? And then request that. You want to have copies of that and know exactly how your kiddo is doing. Okay. The next thing that you want to do is review your child's most recent evaluation. This is another important piece of data you need to gather prior to the ARD meeting. So you may have a copy of it. If you don't, obviously you're requesting your child's record annually. You can also get it from the campus. So you want to look at that evaluation and see whether it should be updated. And you also want to think what has changed for your child since that last evaluation. So let's talk a little bit about the time frame for an evaluation. Okay. A lot of times what you'll hear from a district is we only have to evaluate our student your child every 3 years. That's not exactly true. That is the longest that they can go or wait to do an evaluation per the statute. But actually, you can request an evaluation every year, and there are a lot of good reasons to do that. This is why. Imagine how many pairs of shoes you've purchased for your child in the past couple of years. If their feet are growing, the same thing is happening in their brain. So ideally, you want to be able to take those evaluations from year to year or whatever interval, lay them side by side and see progress on those standardized evaluations. So that's why you want to review those evaluations and see if you need to update them and gather more data in that way by requesting new evaluations. So let's talk about another thing. I'm calling it the read trap, okay? There's a two-step process when you're going to reevaluate a child, a student with an IEP. The first step is a read. That's review existing evaluation data. Okay, that's step one. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The ARD committee will review all of the previous evaluation data. Then step two would be to have the reevaluation. But a lot of times what they'll do is they'll review the read and say, well, we don't really think there's a need to reevaluate this student. So we're going to consider the read date to be the evaluation date. There may be reasons why that makes sense, but you want to take time to look at your individual child and decide, are new evaluations needed? Okay. What will happen is if the read is accepted and no evaluation is conducted, the read date will become the new evaluation date. So you could see hypothetically, you could go years without ever having a new evaluation, but technically there's no violation of that for the evaluation because they did step one and decided there was no additional evaluation needed. You want to look at your own child individually and say, is more data needed? Okay. The other issue you might run into is what I call the qualification trap. So you may request new evaluations and the district might say, okay, parent, we understand, but we know that the student is going to qualify, so we don't really need to do a new evaluation. Well, reevaluations are not just about qualification. They're about getting more data to make sure that the IEP is appropriate. So you want to, again, think through that process. Okay. So just briefly, the district must conduct an evaluation if they determine the educational or related service needs, including improved academic achievement, warrant a reevaluation, or if the parent or teacher requests one. So let's talk about.
Can we go back to that one? I actually have a question on that for a moment.
Sure.
As it relates to, because I know a lot of the schools are backed up and the diags that, sometimes share schools and things like that. So what if you can't get the evaluation? What if as a parent you pay for an evaluation on the outside, and so as a result of one of those evaluations, like for instance, in Harris County, the Harris Center and Texana, sometimes some of these other local intellectual, disability authorities are doing some types of testing and things. Are those accepted? And can you, as a parent, if you have those, can you submit those? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. So with regard to evaluations that the school didn't do, so we'll call those outside evaluations, you provide it to them and they are required to consider it, to review it and decide how much of the information they agree with, want to implement, etc. They're not required to implement those evaluations, only to consider it. So absolutely, school districts being backed up, especially because of COVID, is an issue. When we talk about an initial evaluation, the timeline is set by the statute. When we talk about a reevaluation, it's a little bit different. So what you want to do is talk to the ARD committee about the time frame. Ask them when they're going to have it completed. And then if you feel like it needs to happen sooner because there's an immediate issue, you want to address that with the committee as well. But if you have an outside evaluation, you do definitely want to provide that to them if there's information in it that you want them to see, for a couple of reasons. One, so they can address it in the IEP, and two, so that if they are doing an evaluation and they don't accept your outside evaluation, they can address it by doing their own evaluation to assess the needs in those areas.
But basically, if I'm taking away, I think that the important thing is, just like you gave the shoe example, that brains are changing. And so if we're only reevaluating, every 3 years, their IEP goals may not be in line with what the true need is. And so meeting the child where they are and addressing the progress or the lagging skills more frequently is important. So that way you don't come in and say, wow, we're really a year and a half behind, or, something. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, school districts will give grades, right? That's one measure. They will give you IEP progress reports. That's one measure. Sometimes those can be subjective, or maybe they're right on target, but there's another issue that's coming up. The kiddo is starting to struggle with something they didn't struggle with before. And so an evaluation is another way to catch that, if that makes sense. So those evaluations are more formal and standardized.
And I have one other question that I want to run by you. So, in the circles that we run in the special needs circles, I hear all things from, adversarial ARD meetings and IEP meetings versus like really, really, really wonderful districts that are working with families. But I also hear from families that, they got enough on their plate. I mean, with what they're working with their special needs child and learning differences, let alone other kids that may also have disabilities as well, and full-time jobs, you name it. So how can we have like this really great relationship with the school and have a positive ARD and a positive IEP? Because I believe in my heart of hearts that it's not necessary to be adversarial. It doesn't have to be that way. So if a family, that's really what they want, they want to collaborate with the school and then work with the people at the school. How can they more effectively do that? Or how can they start the process on the right foot?
No, I think that's a great question. And I agree with you that the more collaborative you can be, the better experience for everyone. And I think, as a former teacher, I think generally most school districts go into that intending to be collaborative. They're there because they care about children. That they do what they love. I think one of the things that I would say I see more or less in my practice is the communication piece, is a lot of times where the breakdown is. And that's where things start out adversarial, and it's not really necessary all the time, not in every case. But I think it goes back to, for parents, the thing that they can do is to ask more questions, to be as informed as possible. Not that they're not trying to be informed, but to ask these questions, to flesh all of this out, to get their record, to know what's in their child's file, to ask the committee to explain to them exactly why they're doing what they're doing. Knowledge can decrease a lot of anxiety. If I understand my student's IEP 100%, then I understand what the school district's doing, and there's no miscommunication. I think that's probably the most important part. Send the emails, talk to the teacher, ask questions, request more information. And in an ARD meeting, if you ever don't understand any component of it, you've got to ask for more information. You've got to understand it so that there's not a miscommunication. I think that's probably the most important piece in the collaboration, is understanding 100% of your child's IEP, because it is a nuanced process. Most IEPs are 40 pages long. That's a lot of information to cover. The school district they're the professionals. They do this in the regular practice. You've got to ask more. You got to ask the questions and understand. I think that's the first most important step for a positive ARD.
And I think that may be the confusion. Like, so you have an elementary age child and you're going through this process for the first time, and there's all these rules and laws and stuff like that. And as a parent going into this, especially you got a kindergartner or first grader, You don't even know what you don't know. So when a person, so if we have somebody on here that's like starting this, they know their child has a disability, they know that they at least need a 504, maybe an IEP, whatever. Is there a rights and rights and requirements, or like as a parent, do I get these are your rights, and this is what you can ask for, or this is like an outline of how things go? Because I think, and my kids are older now, so that was a really, really long time ago that I did that. But I remember, my mother has a MBA in education, and she kind of did this stuff. So back then I was just like, oh my gosh, help me, and she did. And so, but I just remember thinking that I didn't know what I didn't know about that. I didn't know what to ask, how to request it. Do I request it to the teacher, the administration? Do I request it in writing or by email, or do I have to send a certified letter? Like, I just really didn't even know what I didn't know. So how do you address families that might be looking at this for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. It is very daunting. The special education alphabet soup in and of itself, an IEP, a BIP, an ARD, I mean, that could drive you nuts just on that surface. I think one of the most important pieces of material parents want to reference is their procedural safeguards. The ARD committee is required to give them copies at regular junctures, but you can also get it offline. I believe the most recent copy is from February of 2021. That outlines not all, but many of a parent's rights. It describes expectations, some timelines, and I believe if it's from the school, it should have contact information for who to contact when they have questions. So the special ed director or a SPED coordinator. The other thing is Texas Education Agency, TEA, puts out an ARD guide, a guide for parents on how to attend an ARD meeting. I would recommend getting a copy of that. It's free. You can Google it or get it off of their website. Go ahead.
And say that again, where that's at.
On the Texas Education website, Texas Education Agency website, TEA.
Okay.
And then there are some other organizations that keep a copy on their website as well. So if you just type it into a search engine, it should come up, Texas ARD Guide or Texas and Procedural Safeguards. The other thing is to tap into the free resources that are available. There's the Rights Law website. He's an attorney who made his name. He's a special education attorney, very famous, made it all the way to the Supreme Court. Our website has free resources. Disability Rights has free resources. Attending these webinars are good ways. There are also support groups online. And then you could consider, if things stop being collaborative, you could consider working with a professional. But obviously that's not the hope. The hope is that things can stay collaborative, but it is hard to know what you don't know, to figure out what you don't know. So in the district,
I'm gonna have you paste some of those websites. I Rights Law, and he has actually been in the Houston area a couple of times and spoke. Really, really great. So Rights Law is one, and then the TEA is another one. But later on, I'll have you put some of those in the chat box, or if somebody else wants to grab them and put them in the chat box for everybody, that would be great. Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. But yeah, it's the other thing was to say, my campus or my school district where I taught, we had parent liaisons. So a parent could contact them. They were usually a parent who also had a child in the district who had special needs, and they would help with support groups, walking them through the process. So I would contact your special education department and ask if they have something like that, a campus liaison or something to support parents to help you get that information.
Okay, but so just initially, in case we have some parents on here, which I think we do, that have never gone through this process before. So basically, if your child has a disability or you suspect learning disabilities, you know they have a disability, whatever. So if you want to get this process started, you basically request a meeting. You request a meeting in writing, or you call the school and try to talk to the DIAG, request testing. Assessments be done.
Yes. So I would say there's kind of two processes for the kiddos who are not in school yet, who are around age 3, contact the special education department and say, I'd like to request a special education evaluation and get that process started. definitely do it in writing, so there's a record of it, just because communication things fall through. You just want to make sure that they got it. If your kiddo's already in school, then you're going to contact your campus contact, and it could be the principal, the teacher, the diag. I say if you throw enough darts, you'll hit a bullseye. So maybe put everybody on the email just so someone will be able to contact you. But you definitely want to put your request in writing. So
and when you say in writing, is an email okay? Is that writing good enough? It doesn't have to be a formalized letter mailed to the school. So
yes, absolutely. And actually email is probably better because it's kept electronically. Letters can get lost, but it doesn't have to be anything formal. Dear principal, I have concerns about my son in reading. I think he's struggling. I'd like to request that he be evaluated for special education. That's more than enough.
That's how it starts. And then from there, was that the 45 days? So if I send that letter, or if I send that to the powers that be, when should I hear back from them by? Or when should I, if I haven't heard back, when should I reach out again? Or where do I go from there?
Okay, yeah, so that's a good question. So if the school district for some reason decides they don't want to evaluate your child, they don't feel like they should be, then they have to give you what we call prior written notice. They have to give you a reason why they're not going to evaluate. If they are going to evaluate, then they need to sit down with you in we call an informed consent meeting. And it's exactly what it sounds like. They're going to get your informed consent to evaluate. And it's informed, so you need to know what assessments they're going to give, why they're giving them, what areas they're suspecting. So it's a conversation between the two of you. If you suspect autism and the school district does not, you want to say, I'd like you to evaluate my student for suspected autism. If they say, we think we're going to look at, I'm trying to think, occupational therapy evaluation, you say, no, I think my kiddo doesn't need occupational therapy. You have that conversation. It doesn't have fine motor skills or sensory issues or whatever. You're having that conversation. So it's informed, you know what they're going to do. So then once they get your consent, your informed consent, then they have 45 school days to complete the evaluation. And then once the evaluation is complete, they have 30 days to hold the ARD. Okay, so it's important to know that these timelines are set by the statute. The school district doesn't have to spend the whole time, but they can. And to Allison's point, they are backed up. So as soon as you think there's an issue, you want to request as soon as possible. Because if you think about it, if you request it now, you're looking at an evaluation finish sometime late November, early December. So that's the rest of the semester. It's kind of a long time. So,
and again, just to be clear, some of these other organizations do evaluations. Some of them do it for free. Some of your local intellectual disability authorities. Also, depending on your child's diagnosis, if you already have a diagnosis of a disability, there are some times where some of these evaluations, not always, oftentimes insurance clearly likes to deny paying for these evaluations, but sometimes your insurance can cover these evaluations. And if your child's between the ages of 14 and 18, sometimes some of these evaluations will also be covered by vocational rehab through the Texas Workforce Commission, through their evaluation process for finding competitive employment. So I'm going to let you continue, but for people that are just kind of wanting to know, how do I do this? How do I get started? Or where do I go from here? I just wanted them to have a clear step initially for starting.
No, that's wonderful. Those are great questions. Okay, let's look at tip number 2. Tip number 2 is to prepare your own PLAAFP. So I like to say PLAAFP, but really you can say present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So this is one of the main, a big component of your child's IEP. So what is present levels? What is a PLAAFP? The statute says that your child's IEP has to contain a statement of their present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And this statement needs to include these elements: how their disability affects their involvement and progress in the general education curriculum, or if they're in preschool, how their disability affects their participation in age-appropriate activities. Okay, why does this matter? Usually the present levels, the PLAAFP, is at the top of the IEP after all the introductory information. And it's generally a paragraph or more, right? It's written in paragraph form. It describes your child. It describes how exactly what the statute requires, how their disability affects their participation in progress in the general education curriculum. But it's more than that. We say it needs to pass the stranger test. And what that means is, if someone who's never met your child picked up their IEP and reviewed the PLAAFP, could they read that and know how to educate your child, how to support them, what they need to be successful in school and on their IEP? And if the answer is no, then the PLAAFP may not be appropriate. So here's a couple of considerations you might have when reviewing it. Does it accurately represent your child? Sometimes the PLAAFP might be written extremely, this is how the student is when things are going well, when there's no unexpected changes. But that's not your kid every day, right? That's not how your child is every day. Sometimes they do have challenges. And when these challenges arise, these are the supports that they need. So you need to be able to say, this is my child 24/7, 7 days a week. This is who they are. This is what they need academically, functionally, in terms of behavior, whatever's appropriate. Okay. Another consideration when you're looking at the PLAAFP is whether it repeats from year to year, ARD to ARD. Do you read it and think, okay, all they did was change 7th grade to 8th grade, or all they did was take out last year's data and input this year's data, right? The PLAAFP should change every time you come back to ARD in some way. Now, there's reasons why it wouldn't. Sometimes you have an amendment ARD or review ARD for a specific thing. But when you are drafting a new IEP for the new year, the PLAAFP should be updated to represent who they are. Again, the shoe example, who they were in 1st grade is not who they are in 2nd grade. They grow, they change, they develop, they overcome, they have successes, new challenges come up. The PLAAFP needs to be organic. It needs to grow with them. Okay. So to have to make the most of your IEP meeting in preparation for the ARD, you should consider drafting your own present level prior to the ARD. Okay. Think about who your child is in that context. When you work with them, when you see the schoolwork that they're bringing home, many of you, because of the pandemic, probably all of you at some point, since it was a shutdown across the state, had the opportunity to work with your child as their teacher. So you kind of saw what the teachers saw. You had a chance to see what it was like working with them, and maybe you gained some insight. That's kind of the idea for drafting your own present levels, to come to the ARD with your idea of who your child is and what they need. Okay. Let's talk about tip number 3. Okay. Now, as Allison said, being collaborative with your school district is the idea. And I think most of the time that's what happens. On occasion, it doesn't. So let's talk a little bit about getting comfortable with disagreement. Now, disagreement does not actually mean that you're not having a positive collaborative experience with your school district. Let's talk first about what a disagreement is. If a parent disagrees with the ARD committee's proposed changes to their child services, or the district being unwilling to make a change that the parent wants, is requesting, then they can disagree at the end of the ARD. And this is an actual step that you take, at the end where you have the signature page, there's an agree box and a disagree box. Okay. You check disagree. And then what happens is you're in a disagreement ARD, and the ARD meeting is recessed for up to 10 school days. Okay. During that time, there's some duties that are triggered for the school district, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But why does disagreement matter? Okay. Disagreement matters not because it's necessarily adversarial. It can be, but it shouldn't be, at least in its essence. It's your right as a parent to disagree. So under the statute, you as a parent are a mandatory ARD committee member. What that means is that they cannot hold the ARD meeting without you unless you refuse to attend. Okay, you are a mandatory member. You are, as we said with the educational records, you are entitled to know what the ARD committee knows. You have a right to understand everything in your IEP. So the opportunity to disagree is your right as a parent, okay? And exercising that right is part of the collaborative process. Your teacher is going to collaborate, is going to advocate for what they believe is best for your child as part of the ARD committee. And that's what you're going to do if you need to disagree. So let's talk about the additional duties that the school district has when you're in a disagreement. So during that recess time, the school district is going to consider alternatives to the request or what's being proposed, the changes. They're going to gather additional data, prepare more documentation, get more resources or more people to come to the ARD to help the ARD committee reach a mutual agreement. That is the goal, is that the ARD committee reaches mutual agreement, that we don't stay in a disagreement. Okay. That's why it's so important, because you are your child, you are the expert on your child. If you don't speak up and voice your concerns and disagree when necessary, many times the ARD committee may not know how you feel or your input. So disagreement is not an adversarial process in and of itself. It's a way for you to exercise your right and get the ARD committee to come together and mutually agree if that's possible. Let's talk about when it's not possible, okay? This is another reason why disagreement is important. And in this situation, it would be an adversarial position. But again, if you as a parent feel like what's happening in the IEP isn't appropriate for your child, then it's important for you to exercise that right. In the disagreement ARD, during that 10 days, the IEP cannot change. So an example is if the school wants to change your child's placement, for instance, and you feel like that placement isn't appropriate, during that 10-day window, if it's appropriate, you can file for a due process hearing request and request stay put, which is a term of art, but basically means while the litigation is going on, your child is going to stay, and their last agreed upon IEP is going to be the IEP that is implemented, unless you and the school decide otherwise. Okay, that's an important tool for you if you feel like that change in your child's IEP would be detrimental to them. So getting comfortable with disagreement is not about being adversarial to your school district initially. It's about exercising your right as a parent, advocating for your child, and as the statute says, reaching mutual agreement. Okay, so those are the 3 tips for making the most of your ARD or IEPT meeting. Do we have any additional questions?
I don't see any questions right now, but I definitely want you guys to put them in the chat box if you have some that weren't answered. And so of course we have webinars like this, and where do they get help? So you're a former educator. I come from a long line of educators. Like my family. I'm not an educator, but definitely come from a long line of educators. And so I come from the perspective of believing that there's a lot of great educators out there and they want to help, but it's like I take that notion of, think about how hard it was to homeschool your child through the pandemic, your child with learning disabilities, and you have 1. Okay, so maybe you have 3. Well, how about if there's 25 in the classroom? I kind of think about some of those things. I don't know, I guess I just think back to like this family, and I truly do believe that their heart of hearts and their intentions are to serve and to truly help your child. But I think that there comes this what's the fork in the road, Mimi, where there's so many times where on the teacher side of the house, sometimes they feel like they're doing this alone, like without the parental support, without the family and things like that. And while we know that oftentimes that isn't true, sometimes it is. Sometimes it is, like, the push-pull kind of, how as a parent we can be doing our part. But so I guess my point is I said it earlier. I just truly believe that this does not have to be an adversarial process. It doesn't have to be this big stress of, I've literally had people being like, well, I'm preparing for this ARD meeting and it's in 3 weeks. They're like about to have panic attacks about this because it's just so stressful for them, or things that they've had happen in the past. But so when a person needs help, how do you know you need help? So basically, if you're in a disagreement and you've conveyed the things that you disagree, and you've provided the reasons why you disagree, and still you're still at an impasse, is that when a person needs help? Or talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you. 99% of educators are there because for the right reasons. Unfortunately, there are situations in Texas, in the United States, in public schools where things happen that shouldn't happen to kids with IEPs. Anything from a disagreement with how the IEP should be written to a well-written IEP that's not implemented to any fill in the blank. So the answer to when do you need help is dependent upon the individual person. When you feel like you have communicated with the school, you've let your concerns be known, and you seriously feel like what's happening in the school is going to negatively impact your child and the district, you don't feel like the district is hearing you, that's the time to get help. But actually, that's the time to get help as a last resort. What I would say is the adage, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago or today, right? That's a today situation. I would say the more educated you can be on the topic, the more information you can get, the more communicative, the more you can get ahead of these things. So working with a professional when things are okay, talking to, getting an advocate, getting an attorney, meeting with someone who's knowledgeable to educate yourself, going to the rights law seminars when they're in Houston, that's actually the best way to make sure you don't need someone like me, right? Is to get ahead to the degree that you can. Now, that being said, we've had clients who are incredibly collaborative, and sometimes you just can't get there. You still need help, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I really do think staying collaborative, staying communicative, and asking those questions so that you know exactly what's going on. It's the same in any other industry. If I go to the doctor, I want to know why they're prescribing what they're prescribing, what the side effects are, and why I need this medication or why I need this procedure. It's the same thing in public school. Why do you feel like they need these services? Why do you feel like 15 minutes of speech every other week is enough? How is that going to address the issue? You're not being adversarial, you're gaining more information so that you can understand, oh, I see, okay, well, there's only this one issue, maybe 15 minutes is enough. Or, I appreciate the information, but I don't know if you're aware my child has XYZ. I don't think that 15 minutes is enough. Could we talk about increasing to 30 minutes? And these are just examples, but I think that's the most important part. If you get to a point where you can't work it out, then, I would say that that's the time to engage a professional as quickly as possible, because then you're running into a situation where you're losing time, right? They only get one childhood. So.
Right. So we have a couple more questions, but I wanted to run something by you that was like a misnomer. And of course, when I did this, it was many, many years ago, but when you're, requesting, assessments and testing and accommodations and other things like that. So basically you have to go through this process if your child needs accommodations, but just because you go through this process does not mean that they're in the special ed department. And I think that that's a misnomer for people sometimes, that if they go through this process and they have accommodations, then their child is special ed as opposed to being general ed. And can you talk about that? So basically a student could have accommodations, but not be in special ed classes, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So that is an unfortunate stigma left over from eons ago.
When we were kids. Yes.
Right. And it persists,
Yeah.
It persists today. And this is what I tell people. If Albert Einstein was in Houston ISD right now as a student, he would be on an IEP. As brilliant as he was, he needed specially designed instruction. So having special education is just about that. It's about specially designed instruction and related services. So there are students who graduate at the top of their class who have an IEP. It's not about how smart or not smart you are. It's about what you need. You have a disability, and by reason of that disability, you need specially designed instruction. So you're absolutely right. So you could be a student with an IEP and be in general education, and you're only receiving accommodations. Or you could be a student with an IEP who's in a self-contained classroom receiving a modified curriculum, and anything in between. Like I said, there are students who are valid, graduating top of their class who have IEPs, and everything in between. It's stigmatized because we don't understand it. We assume special education means that there's something that it has to do with intelligence, and that's not the entire picture, actually.
And I just wanted to bring that up in case, there's this thing of foolish pride as moms that we have, or parents that we have. And for anybody that may have delayed or waited on having these conversations with the school because they didn't want that stigma of special education, it's not like that. This isn't the way we went to school. It's not like that anymore. So don't be afraid to ask if you're on the fence about that. So, which brings us to another question that's on the flip side. How do I get my child out of special ed? What do I do to show as a parent for my child that he could be striving in general education? So when we address that, how do we do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually have two answers to that. The first, though, is that ARD actually stands for Annual Review and Dismissal. So one component of the meeting is the idea that a child might be dismissed from special education. So if that's the case, and you feel like your child should be dismissed from special education, then you would want to request an evaluation, have the district do an evaluation to assess whether they continue to need specially designed instruction, because it's a two-pronged test. You could have a disability and not need a specially designed instruction. So that would be how you would get them dismissed from special education. But as far as them striving in general education, they could strive in general education and still have an IEP. So that's going to depend on the kiddo individually, but hopefully that answered the question.
Yes. Okay. So, and then we've got one more, and then I've got one that I want to ask in light of the pandemic. So we've got what if the agreement can't be reached? For example, if the ISD is not allowing nursing to come to the school during COVID and the student needs the nurse for safety, how do we address that?
Okay, so the short answer is going to be a very attorney answer, and I apologize, but it's really going to depend on the individual facts of that case. Private nursing in public schools is an ongoing issue. And like I said, it's really going to depend on the individual. But I would say, honestly, you would want to talk to a professional about your individual facts. The COVID component is tricky because, because COVID is tricky, but because, last year, school districts were allowed to make their own rules about COVID protocols, right? And then we've had other intervention or other orders that the governor's order not allowing local communities and school districts to mandate masks, right? There's a whole debate here. So the COVID issue in and of itself of who can be on campus, who can't, is very nuanced. But even prior to the pandemic, personal nursing services or nursing services is something that is there's not a straightforward answer. And it depends really, on the individual facts of each of that matter is what I'm trying to say. I apologize, but
I think honestly that could be like a whole webinar on that, because that was actually the next thing that I was going to chat about, is because in talking to families over the last year and a half, I mean, we've got some real struggles going on, where some of these kids, simply because of their disabilities and learning challenges, this Zoom learning just simply isn't working for them. And so we've got a lot of people in that category. And honestly, even the teachers, like how hard. I mean, it was hard enough to to teach in the classroom with these kids live and in person, and when you got half your class with ADD and on a computer, I mean, how incredibly difficult it is to even teach that. But so basically, what you're saying with the COVID, and districts are kind of, they have their own COVID protocols as it relates to this. So if your child with disabilities is especially struggling in an online learning environment, I mean, reach out to the district and find out what their protocols are, or find out, I mean, so I guess let's just say I'm in a particular district and my COVID protocols are horrible. My child is doing horribly, and they have been for a year and a half or however long. What options do I have in that example? Because this is a topic that I'm hearing every week. I mean, education for these kids that learn differently is a big deal. So what do I do if the COVID protocols aren't ideal and my child is just, okay, so we have this IEP in place, they're not meeting any of their goals or coming anywhere close. What are my options at that point, or what should I do?
Okay, no, great question. So the first thing is, whether your child is in person or virtual or some hybrid, whatever the situation, as long as they're have an IEP and enrolled in their school district, if something in their IEP isn't working, the first step is always to contact the school. Always let them know your concerns. I would suggest doing it in writing. It's just easier to remember who you were talking to. But you always want to let them know what your concerns are. So that going back to when the pandemic happened in March of 2020, okay, so we've been through this whole evolution. I can't believe it's been over a year. But even then, when the first shutdowns happened, school districts understandably were scrambling to make it work. I think the best example was building the plane as they were flying it. Even then, we would encourage parents, clients, reach out to the school district, because there are some students who cannot learn in Zoom. They're either not going to pay attention, they're not able to focus. We had examples of kiddos who developed new behaviors they never had before because the Zoom platform was just too stressful and being home was just too much. There's too many distractions, or 3 kids, 1 computer. I mean, you name it. It came up. So, but the first step is always to reach out to your school district and say, hey, Zoom's not working. Here are the issues. How can we address this? Because even if your kiddo's in virtual, they still have a right to a free, appropriate public education. It's not going to look exactly like it does when they're on campus, because it can't, but they're still entitled to one. And so the school district needs to respond, be responsive, and help you work it out. Okay. That's the first step. Beyond that, it's really going to depend on the individual situation. We've had some school districts that don't offer virtual this year, other school districts who are insisting kiddos come back. Maybe the kiddo can't come back because they have a medical condition. I mean, it's highly nuanced, and there's not one straightforward answer to fit everybody. But step one is always, talk to your ARD committee, call an ARD, and start addressing it and documenting your concerns and asking for help from the ARD committee.
That's good. And hopefully, although it doesn't seem like the pandemic is anywhere close to ending anytime soon, I guess, I don't know, that's gloom and doom, but sometimes it seems that way. But hopefully, things are going to turn around for everyone, because again, this is hard for parents. It's hard for teachers. It's hard for the students. I think everybody, everybody is struggling, and all on one side, as a parent with kids that struggling learning, learners, on one side, I say, okay, take a deep breath, take a chill pill. Is like this, 9-month school year or whatever is not going to make or break the existence of your child, and your child is going to succeed in life, and things are not always perfect. People get sick, things happen, people die, people miss school, things happen. And so it's easy for me to reflect that, because my kids are grown basically, and I've kind of been there, done that, and kind of looking back, I mean, I had one that, struggled to read. I mean, I think that we were probably in 2nd grade before she was reading good. Like, I mean, we really struggled, and all kinds of, tutoring and things like that. But looking at where they are, I mean, I think when we're in the public school, we're always comparing our kids to others. We're always looking around, and I really spend time kind of talking about, this is about, and in this process, it's about meeting the child where they are. It's not comparing them to all the other third graders, because they're not all the other third graders. That's your third grader. And so what if your third grader is not where they need to be on the third grade level? I've seen things where it's like, as a parent, you feel frustrated. I mean, I remember these years where we taught the times table 3 years in a row. And each year it was like Groundhog Day, like it had never been taught before. Like it was this new concept that we had never even discussed. And but then we just kept going back to it, and instead of moving forward, and that they didn't learn that critical concept of where they needed to be, we just started over and just pretended like we had never taught it before. We just started over. We met them where they are, and then I can say all those years later, everything was okay. So like when you have these young kids and you're going through the elementary school at first, I mean, you're panicked because you were just feeling like you're behind, or are you failing as a mom, or the teacher's failing? We want to blame people. But sometimes your child, and with their disability, their maturity level is just behind. They're just behind their peers, and they're not ready to learn that yet. And so, I mean, I don't know. And that's just kind of some insight, because I've been there with the younger kids, and we got through it, and we are where we are today, and we're all okay. So anyway, so these are some things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. These are just, again, Consolidated Planning Group. We're a special needs planning firm, working with special needs families all the time. But these are some things that should be on your planning radar. We can help with these things, but there's just a lot of things, whether you're just starting out, maybe you have a new diagnosis, or maybe you're transitioning, you've got a child transitioning into adulthood. We can help with future care plans. You've got questions about SSI, Medicaid, SSDI, all of those things. And you can go to the next slide, but basically we have webinars on all of these topics on our YouTube channel. So you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can kind of search for the ones that might be applicable to you. So today we have had Jennifer Swanson with us with the Shields Law Firm. And basically you guys are in the greater Katy area, right? Is that right?
So main office is located in Katy, but we practice statewide.
Yes. And our office team, we're located in Sugar Land, and we actually practice all across the United States, so we can serve people even out of Texas, but we do serve people all over Texas as well. So Jennifer, just because this is a topic that comes up every time, I just wanted you to also mention, so a lot of our families need to discuss special needs trust and guardianship and things like that. Does your law firm provide services for special needs trust and guardianship and things like that as well? Are you able to do those?
Yes, we are. We do guardianship, special needs trusts, and obviously special education law. So.
Okay, for sure. Okay, well, I just wanted to make sure that people knew what you did. And at the very last, we are going to send today's slides in a PDF, so you guys have those for your reference. We don't always send the slides, we always send the recording, but today we will send those as a PDF. And I think that this is a perfect time, since we've got a special needs planner, we've got a special needs attorney on, to just share the difference. And if you've attended before and you've heard this before, not to repeat, but there's a lot of confusion in the special needs community about the difference between basically a special needs planner and a special needs attorney. And what I like to explain is that a special needs planner, we're nuanced in special needs. We're nuanced in the things and basically money in the right buckets and directing things so that way you maintain your eligibility or don't lose eligibility for state and federally funded programs. We are also we're the money, okay? So we're how much money do I need for the future care for my loved one that's going to have care needs for the rest of their life? We're the Social Security analysis type people. We're the money. How do I retire for 25 to 35 years and still have enough money to fund care for my child? And you need us. but you also need the special needs attorney. So a lot of times, so they're the paper, they're the legal documents. We don't draft legal documents. We don't give legal advice. You need the special needs attorney. And I would say your situation is specialized, so you want a specialist, okay? Don't go to a generalist attorney to talk about special needs. They will mess you up, and you'll accidentally have an incorrect special needs trust, right? So same thing with the financial thing. It is critically important that you have money in the right buckets. So that way you maintain this eligibility in the future. And your average financial advisor is not nuanced in special needs. So it's very important that you work with specialized individuals. But I always just like to make the, kind of the clear understanding between the two, because I think people call you and ask financial advice. People call us and ask legal advice. So we all work closely together. But this industry is kind of siloed between the financial and the legal, and both very much matter. So I just wanted to share that with everybody that's visiting today. So that's all I've got for today. I've got 1 o'clock, and we always try to end right on time. We will get this recording out, and we'll get the PDF out. You'll also have the contact information for Jennifer and myself. And if you have additional questions, we're happy to meet with you one-on-one by Zoom to have a better understanding of, what questions and support you might need or your unique situation. But thanks again, Jennifer, for being here. What a great job and a great topic. We haven't had this one in quite some time, so I'm so happy to partner with you today.
Very nice. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye now.
Bye.